Everyone, we are recording, so welcome to our week 6 live classroom. So I was just telling these guys, everyone did a really good job with the exam. Last week was a really intense week. I think it's one of the most intense weeks of the course, so don't give up yet. We are done with week 5. Week 6, we added on to the concepts learned in week 5, but we don't have an exam, which is happy news. So just hang in there and keep me posted if you have any questions. One thing that I wanted to share real quick. So I was also telling these guys, I can't see these screens with your feedback on them. So I had a student take some screenshots for me at one point. So this is how you view your feedback, at least for the assignments. I do leave feedback on all your peer review journals, just talking about your performance in the class and how you're feeling about everything. And so you can view that going into assignments, into the assignments tab, not the grades tab, but into the assignments tab, and then finding that specific assignment and then hitting view feedback. And Christy, it sounds like to view the exam feedback for exam 1, you just click on quizzes and go down to the exam and click on view feedback. Is that right?
No, so you can click on quizzes or you can go to my grades. So you get there either way, but you don't want to click on, it doesn't say feedback, it says details. So you want to click details.
Okay, awesome. All right, and if you guys have any questions about viewing any feedback or grades, just let me know. So, but you shouldn't have something like this, like with an attached file. You should just have a link to all my audio feedback that I've been doing this semester. All right, without any further ado, let's dive into chapter 6. This week we'll be covering selection, which is really awesome, also very important. Selection is what, it's basically how a computer appears to make decisions. And all selection will be evaluated to either a true or a false condition. And so I could relate this to English, and say, if I get to my church building at 9 a.m., I'll be on time. Else I won't, I won't be on time. So in JavaScript, it's very similar. You can have an if statement, and if the condition equates to true, then a certain block of code will be executed. Else, if it's false, if that condition is false, then I can have a separate block of code to be executed in that case. So we are going to be using a lot of relational operators. So just now my example is, if I get to church before 9 o'clock, okay? So I could say, if time is less than 9 o'clock or something like that. But for that example, I would probably use the less than operator, maybe less than or equal to. If time is less than or equal to 9 o'clock a.m., then I'm on time. Good job. Okay, but all of these will end up equating to a Boolean value. Okay, so if I say, if I is less than 3, either that's true or false. If X is greater than Y, either it's true or false. And so all of these if statements using these relational operators end up equating to true or false, so that the computer knows whether it should go into that if block of code to execute it or whether it should do the else block of code. Any questions about these operators? Okay, so let's look at some examples. So right here, I have, I declared var balance at 560, and I said if balance is greater than 50, okay? And then here's like this block of code that I was talking about. So I have an opening curly brace and a closing one, and then everything inside this curly brace set will get executed if balance is greater than 500, okay? And then down below, I have another if statement. I'm like, if balance is less than 550, then I could do something else. But notice the syntax here. So I have the keyword if. It's a reserved keyword in JavaScript for this purpose, similar to var and different things like that. But it is reserved, and so you just say if, and then inside parentheses, I'll have my condition, okay? Using those relational operators, if time is less than or equal to 9 o'clock, or if balance is greater than 500, anything, okay? I can put in here and then have a specific block of code be executed dependent on this condition. Okay, so if statements are good when you only have one true choice to worry about. Okay, and what that means is if I have a bunch of different conditions that I have to think about, um, let's say with that example of being to church on time, let's say I also wanted to find people who got to church early, so a single if statement might not work for that because I'd have to see everyone who got there at 9, everyone who got there before 9, and everyone who got there after 9. So an if statement is good if you only have like one condition that you have to check for. But if there are more than one condition, if there's more than one condition that you have to check for, let's say I wanted to just check to see if somebody was on time or not. I could say if time is less than or equal to 9, then they're on time. Else, they weren't on time. Okay, and so I could use an else block of code to define anything that's opposite the if statement. Okay, so right here, I have var sales equals 1250. I declared bonus right here, but I didn't assign it anything. And I said, if sales is less than or equal to 1,000, then bonus equals 20. Else, bonus equals 100. Okay. And then regardless of these statements, this final line of code will always be executed. Okay. So right here, if we look at our desk check, sales. Yeah. Do you have a question? Okay, no one has a question. So here, sales was declared at 1250. And so we would not touch this block of code. It would check here, sales less than or equal to 1,000. That would be false. And so we wouldn't execute this line of code right here. Instead, we would go to the else block of code, and bonus would get the value of 100. And then we would add all that to our salary, and salary would end up being 225. Okay. Well, that's wrong. Sales. Oh no, that's right. Okay. So any questions about this code right here? Does it kind of make sense, or is it just like, how are you guys feeling about it?
I think it makes sense for now.
Okay, awesome. All right. So again, that wouldn't be very ideal if there were more than two scenarios that we had to plan for. The if and else would work great if I had to say if someone would be on church or on time for church or not. But if I wanted to do more than two conditions, then I also can throw in an else if. So here is when you have multiple conditions that you have to check for. Okay, you can use an if statement if you have one condition. You can use else in conjunction with an if you have to deal with two conditions, or you can use else if as many times as you want for a bunch of conditions. So here I have a function called greet user. So it prompts, a little pop-up comes up on your screen saying, how old are you? And they'd put in their age, and then their greeting would be, like, I'm 26 years old. If age is less than 21, and I'd say, okay, wow, you're really young. That's awesome. Else if age is greater than 20 and age is less than 40. Okay, so I'm isolating everything between 20 and 40. Okay, I'd say that's a great age, and I'd say else, so this will get everything else. So far I've covered less than 21, from 20 to 40, and now I'll say everything from 40 and up would be, I can't wait until I get to that age. I'm 26 years old. Okay. So here, I could have I could have an else if for every single number if I wanted to, but here I can merge different relational operators, these less than, greater than, symbols, along with these ampersands, so these like double ands, to say, okay, if this is true and this is true, then we're going to do this, and so I could have multiple statements like this, checking multiple things. So any questions about this?
So can you explain the ampersand? That just means the first part, including the second part, has to be true? Is that what that means?
Yes. Yeah, so let's look. So we're in chapter 6. Hopefully I have this saved somewhere. Nested is. Okay, it looks like I don't have that saved somewhere. Okay, but what the ampersands do, this will just check. So if the first condition right here, so right here I have 2 conditions inside of this else if statement, okay? It will first check to see if age is greater than 20. And if age is greater than 20, then it'll keep going. If that's false, if age is greater than 20, if that's false, then it'll just skip over this else if and it'll go down to this else, okay? But if age is greater than 20, then it will check for this next part right here. It'll say, okay, age is greater than 20, and let's make sure age is less than 40. And if that's true, so if age is from 21 to 39, then it will go into this else if block, okay? So anytime you have these 2 ampersands right here, it's basically saying and. In English, it's just and. That's all it's saying. If age is greater than 20 and age is less than 40. Okay, so that's all that means right there. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, yeah, and any other questions about this piece of code? Okay. So we also have a switch statement. Don't worry, guys, this is the last new thing we're going to learn today. Okay, so a switch statement is very similar to an if statement, but it's when there's a bunch of different conditions. So, and it's just a more efficient way of writing if, else if, else if, else if, else if. You could do that, and it would do the exact same thing that a switch statement is going to do. But a switch statement kind of breaks it down a little bit and makes it a little bit less to look at, and it kind of simplifies things a little bit. But you never have to use a switch statement if you don't want to. For this class, you'll get quizzed on it and stuff. But outside of this class, if you never want to use it, you never have to. And but it is here if there are a lot of different choices that exist to kind of clean up your code and make it so that you have less of the if else parentheses, opening curly brace, closing curly brace, if else, and so forth, But here's the syntax of the switch statement. And this is just a screenshot that I took straight from your book. But here's what it looks like. I have what the condition is in this case is just a variable. I wouldn't have any relational operators in here. I would just have a single variable. Okay, so we talked about the getting to church on time thing. Okay, and in that case, every single time I had a condition, I was talking about the variable time. Okay, if time is less than 9, if time is, that was the variable that we were dealing with. All right, so in here I could have that variable time, and then I could say case, and then I could have a value. I could say if case is 9 o'clock, or if case is less than 9 o'clock. And so right here is where I would put those specific conditions relating to the variable time. Okay, and then I'd have a statement, whatever I want to do, and then break to say end this code once those statements are completed. After each one of these different values that you put in, if I said less than 8:45, equal to 9 o'clock, greater than 9 o'clock, I could also have a default that would handle everything else. Okay, and so this is just a different way to write a bunch of else if statements. Okay, and so with this, I wouldn't have an if statement, I wouldn't have an else statement, I wouldn't have else if statements. It would just be switch, and then it would check for all of them. Okay. Any questions about this? And we'll go into examples here in a little bit, but do you guys have any questions right now? Okay.
So if you didn't have the break, it would just keep going over and over in a loop, right?
So it wouldn't go into a loop, but looking at this one, if I didn't have the break right here, it wouldn't stop the code. Okay, so let's say this variable class standing was equal to F. Okay, just this string capital F. And I didn't have this break here. What would happen is it would assign November 23rd to register date. But then the code wouldn't stop. And so it would ask if class standing is S, no, it's F. If case is J, or if class standing is J, it's not. If it's N, it's not. But then there's this default block of code down here. Okay, so class standing, if it was F, would get assigned register date first up here, but then it would also come into here. Register date would get reassigned with the value of none. It would alert unknown class standing. And so if that break isn't there, the code will just continue to run. And it'll still check all these and see that it's not these ones, but it'll hit this default block and it's not going to do what you're wanting it to do. So that's what the break does. It's like, okay, I found a value. This is what I want it to do. Break. I'm getting out of the switch statement. We don't have to do it anymore. So that's what that's there for. Great question. So here is a simple example of a case statement. Okay, so we have this class standing variable, and it checks the value of this variable, and it'll assign it, you know, in this case, a different register date for each different type of student. And if the type of student wasn't found, then it would just say none. And so I can handle 4 different conditions along with a default for anything else if it didn't meet those 4 conditions. Any questions about this?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, class standing is a variable, it has a value, and if that value matches case F, then it will create a new variable called register date, which will be equal to the value of November 23rd. Is that
Yes.
what I'm hearing?
Yep. All except that it didn't create it. It looks like register date was at least declared previously, but it looks like we didn't assign it anything. But yes, it would assign November 23rd to register date if class standing was equal to F.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Does that make sense, Garrett? Awesome. So yeah, pretty slick. It's nice because you can handle a bunch of different stuff and, you know, many conditions, as many as you want, and you don't have to have like parentheses and opening of curly braces for all of them. The one thing that you do have to add that you don't have to add in the else if statements is these breaks. But with that, it can also increase performance because let's say, this would be extremely rare, but let's say, for example, I had 100 different conditions that I had to check for. Okay, if I had an else, like an if else block, you know, I could go through a bunch of those and potentially execute several of them. But with this, you know, as soon as this break happens, it'll just get you out of the code and it won't keep executing this switch statement. Okay, so performance-wise, this can be helpful. But again, in my career, very few times have I used a switch statement, just for your guys' information. But,
So the word case, you have to put that in there. That's part of the function?
Yep, that's part of the switch statement.
Okay.
Yep, good question. So are these colons and semicolons, they're all required when you're using a switch statement.
Okay.
Yep, good question. All right, so let's go into an example. So in this example, let me just open it up here. We have odd and evens. Okay, so I have a little defining table right here. I have the input will be just a single integer. Processing, determine if the integer is even or odd. Okay, so pretty simple. And then output is just a message that says if the integer is even or odd. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through this code and then we'll run it real quick. Okay, so down in the HTML, the only thing that will display on the page is please enter an integer. Then we have an input, a button to run the function isEven, and then an output div to display the output. So in here, we get the integer from the user, and it came through as text, and then we parsed it to a number. And so here's our input. And then I put here, we're going to choose a message. Okay, so I declared message, and then here's how I check to see if a number was odd or even. Okay, I don't know if you guys remember this from last week. Got lots of questions about it throughout the week. The modulus checks for the remainder after division has taken place. Okay, so let's say I had like 21 modulus 4. I would check to see how many times 4 goes into 21, which is 5. And then there's 1 left over because 4 times 5 is 20, and there's 1 left over. So 21 mod 4 would be 1. Okay, and so right here, I have a number, any number. okay? If that number, mod 2, is equal to 0, it means it's even, because it was evenly divisible by 2, which makes it an even number, okay? If I had 4 mod 2, the remainder would be 0, because 2 goes into 4 evenly twice. If I had 50 mod 2, it goes in 25 times, 0 is left over, and 50 is an even number. So right here, to check in this program, to check if it's an even number or not, I'll just say if number mod 2 is equal to 0. Then we'll say message, the number that the user put in is an even integer. Else, it's an odd integer. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and we can see it working in action. Okay, please enter an integer. Let's hit F12, and we're just going to walk through this. So I'm going to put in 50. It's a nice number. Okay, so text comes through as a string, the number 50. Okay, and just so you guys know, I love the debugger. I opened up the developer tools by hitting F12, but you can also right-click in the page and hit inspect. Once these open up, if you click on sources, you can click on a line number over here and put a breakpoint inside of a function. Okay, and then when you click on that function, it'll open up that, it'll stop your code with this nice green bar here, and that'll show you where your code's at, where your code is currently running. And I can look to see, you know, what text came through as, and if parse int is defined, and you can see it's defined as a function here. And so I can see different things in my code and how it's working with the computer. To go to my next function call, I can hit this button or press F10. And so that's usually what I do. I'll just press F10 once I'm ready to go on. Then I can hover over number. I can see it got the number 50 here. Message is undefined. We didn't assign it anything. We just declared it. But then here we have number modulus 2. So I can highlight over this chunk of code right here and see that it gets 0. Or I can highlight over this chunk of code and see that it equates to true. So like we talked about earlier, if conditions will always equate to either a true or a false value, to a Boolean value. And so right here, I said, okay, number mod 2, whatever that gets, if it's equal to 0, then that'll be true, and it'll go into this block of code. Okay, so you can see it stepped inside of our if statement right here. And our message, which is currently undefined, will now get 50 is an even integer. Okay, and then I hit F10 and it skipped over entirely this else statement. It'll always skip over my comments, but it just skipped this else statement. It found that if condition to be true, and so it did that, and then it didn't have to do anything else with that if else block of code. And so message is 50 is an even integer, and then I'll hit F8 to just let it go, and that displayed on the page. 50 is an even integer. Okay. Any questions about that? About this program, modulus, if statements, booleans, debugging? Any questions about anything we just touched?
I actually have a question about text and number variables. So can we parse int in one line like we do parse float or not?
You sure can. Yeah. So JavaScript is pretty flexible. I did this just to show you guys the debugging, but usually I would just do this. You know, and I could put that in the exact same line of code, because anything that this gets, this document get element by ID dot value, it can get a specific value, and I can parse it. I could even do math with it right now if I wanted. I could say 5 times that. You know, I could do a bunch of stuff on the right side of that equal sign if I wanted to. You know, and that would be perfectly valid code. Sometimes you want to split things out just so that it's easier to debug or easier to understand everything that's going on. And other times you're just like, you know what, I'm going to throw this together. So yeah, great question. And any other questions about any of this? Okay, awesome. Well, let's keep going then. Where'd that go? There it is. All right, next one. Finding roots in JavaScript. So JavaScript code for finding the real solutions of a quadratic equation if they exist. You're never going to have to do this. I will show you this example, but you will never have to do this. And I'm not super good with math. I know basic math. If you give me a complex equation, I can like convert it. But you won't ever have to do this. What is being shown here is the selection logic in this case. So in our last program, we checked to see if it was odd or even. In this program, it's computing the roots of a quadratic equation if they exist. Okay, and that does that by getting this discrete value and checking to see if it's a positive value, 0 or greater. Okay, and if it is, then it'll find the roots and display those. Okay. So this is just an example of how you can use selection logic in a program. Any questions about this?
So we won't have any questions on the exam about quadratic equations?
I don't think so, no. And if you do, I will be sure that you're very ready for them or I will take them off. But I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll definitely have math. And you'll have math that will require selection, but nothing with like calculus or discrete mathematics or anything like that. So,
Okay, great.
yeah, great, right? Thank heavens. All right, good question. Okay. Oh, speaking of the quadratic formula, there it is. If anyone wants to know, we can talk about that later. Okay, finding roots in JavaScript, nested if statements. This is much more applicable. Nested if statements will be in pretty much any program you're ever going to work with outside of this class. As far as a professional environment goes, nested if statements are extremely common because there are often times where if something's true, you want to do something else, or you want to check to see if something else is true within that. You know, the going to church example is a dumb example, but we're already on it, so let's just keep going. You know, I could check to see if someone like is consistently making it to church on time, if they've made it to church on time X number of times, if females make it to church more than males, like anything, you know. And so those would all likely contain nested if statements. You know, I check to see if someone was on time, and then if it was a male, or if they've done that before, you know, and all of those would be nested if statements. So let's go ahead and look at one of these examples. So right here, I have a program to just like wave hello or goodbye. Okay, and with this, I declared a couple of values, and I said if x is less than 2, we'll go into this block of code. Okay, now once we're in this block of code, I'm going to check to see if y is greater than 8. Okay, now one thing that throws people off a lot of the time is, let's say y is greater than 8. Obviously, we'd go into this chunk of code, and the message would be hello. Let's say y is less than 8. Okay, let's think about what this code would do. We have this if statement right here that it corresponds to this else statement. Okay, this else statement is not over here and is not inside that bracket. It's just not. Okay, it is down below and it corresponds to the first if statement. Okay, this second if statement, if y is greater than 8, if it is false, it would check for an else statement right here. If it doesn't find an else statement, it will skip this, it will skip this, and it will jump all the way down here. Okay, these sometimes take practice to figure out how they're working, but it all comes down to where the curly braces lie. Indentations really help with understanding where these things are at, but at the end of the day, it's the curly braces that make the difference. Okay. In your text editor, I'm pretty sure Visual Studio Code does this, but if you look really closely at this, you can see when I click on this to the right of this curly brace, it has this nice little underline here. And the closing brace that corresponds to it also has a nice little underline. Can you guys see that?
Oh, yes.
A little bit, maybe? Okay, it's pretty small. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so it has an underline right here. Okay, and same thing with these parentheses. See this, how I clicked in here and it shows where the opening and closing parentheses are.
I wondered
And then
what
this curly
those were
brace.
for.
Yeah. So it's to help you see where things are opening and closing, which is really helpful, especially when you get nested if statements, because you could have multiple lines of if statements that are all nested together, and it could get really confusing. So here you can see where this if statement is closing, that it's just this right here. And again, if this computes to false, then it'll just jump all the way down here, because this if statement was already true, so it won't go into this else statement, regardless of what happens on the inside of this first if statement. Does that make sense? A little bit? Let's run this and see it in action. I love the debugger. It's an amazing thing. I can't even imagine like learning how to code like 20 years ago and not having the developer tools. It'd be awful. I rely on them a lot. Okay, so I have my function, time to wave. I'll throw a breakpoint in the first line inside of this function. So right after this curly brace, I'm putting a breakpoint right here, okay? So as soon as I click the button, wave, it'll come in here. So X input, let's see what we're talking about here. So I'll put X is Y and Y is 5. Sorry, X is 1, Y is 5. And let's hit this button. Okay, so we have X is a string. Let's change this real quick. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, so I'm gonna click here, hold control, and say parse float, and parse both of those. So we get a nice number to do math with. Okay, so X is equal to 1, Y is equal to 5, and let's try this again. All right, so we got X, it's a number, good, that's good, number 1. Y is 5, and our message is currently wave. Okay, so let's look through this real quick before I let this code execute and we see what happens. I want you guys to look through this code and tell me what you think message will be at the end of it, okay? So you can see all this program is gonna do is going to output message to the output div, okay? Currently message is wave, but I want you guys to think about what message will be at the end of this code, okay? So go ahead and just take a sec to look at this. Again, X is 1, Y is 5. What will message be?
It'd be goodbye.
Good thought. Any other contenders?
I think it would still be wave.
I think it would be wave.
Good. Yeah, very good. So why would it still be wave?
Because of the curvy bracket.
Well said, because it's true, because of the curvy brackets. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's run it. All right, so X is 1. So if I highlight this, we'll see that it equates to true. So we're going to go into line 12. All right, and now we have a second if statement, which is nested in the first. Okay, this isn't an else if statement. This is an if statement inside the first. Okay, so Y is equal to 5. Is Y greater than 8? False. That is false. So this whole thing will get skipped over. And because this if statement was already true, this else statement will not get touched. Okay, so if I hit F10 to jump to my next line of code, it'll jump all the way to the bottom and message remains wave. Okay, good job, you guys. Let's try this again. Let's say X is 5 and Y is 10. Let's run it. All right, what do you guys think now? What'll it be?
Goodbye.
X is 5. Yeah, goodbye. Very good. So this one, we didn't even go into this. So X was not greater than 2. So if I highlight this right here, it says false. So we'll go straight into our else statement. And that's all we have to worry about. Message will be assigned goodbye, and that's what we'll display to the user. Okay. So yeah, feel free to practice with stuff like this, and do expect it on quizzes and exams because it's coming. So just remember, every if and else statement are like correspond to each other. You'll never have an else statement without an if statement. You can have an if statement without an else statement. Okay, so like this, it doesn't have a corresponding else. So what did it do? It just jumped to the bottom, and with the last example, it was still wave. okay? But if there is an else statement, there will never be a time when both are executed, okay? If x is less than 2, it'll go into this if statement. If it's not, then it'll go into the else statement. It's one or the other. It will never do both the if and the else statement. That would defeat the purpose of selection, okay?
So it will
So
be
anytime you have an else
hello
statement,
if x is less than 2 then, right? So
what was that?
When is it going to show hello? If x is less than 2, but y is, yeah, what am I trying to say? I'm confused. Like when is it going to show hello?
Yeah, okay, so let's try this one, okay? So I put x is 1 and y is 10. Okay, so messages wave again, same as before. X is equal to 1, so it'll come into this one. And then y is 10, so y is greater than 8. So it'll come into here. Message will get assigned hello, and then it'll jump to the bottom because this else statement won't get executed. And so it'll be hello. So the only time the message will be hello with this example is if x is less than 2 and y is greater than 8. Okay, this would have to be true, and then this would have to be true for it to be hello. Good question. Any other questions about this?
I do.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it just be easier just to put it in the first if statement? If x is less than 2 and then, the 2 ampersands?
Yes, it would be. So nested if statements, we would only want to do this if we had a second condition down here. If there was something else that I wanted to do if x was less than 2, then I could have multiple statements inside of this to deal with that. But the way it was, Garrett, like you were saying, it's like there's nothing else in here. It's like I'm checking if x is less than 2 and y is greater than 8. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave it at goodbye or wave, I guess the one difference, so what he was saying, guys, if I just went like this, okay, and then I could delete these out of here and just do that, okay? If x is less than 2 and y is greater than 8, the message would be hello. The only difference is the first time we were doing this, goodbye would be assigned anytime x was less than 2. But now goodbye will be assigned only if x is less than 2 and y is greater than 8, or y isn't greater than 8, okay? So this would change our logic a little bit just for when we say goodbye, but it would hold true for when hello would be assigned. Okay, so that would be the only difference. So these things can get a little bit confusing, but yeah, that was a great question, Garrett. Any other questions about this?
Brother Birch, can you show us an example of how to mix up the brackets so that it comes out with a different result? I'm a little confused about how the brackets change it.
Yes, I would love to. So let's do this. I will move this one up one bracket. So I'll hold Control Shift and do my up arrow. So I moved this block of code above this bracket. I'm going to tab it over just to help us see where it's at. Okay, so now here's my opening bracket for my first if statement, and here's my closing bracket for it. Okay, if I did this, okay, let's think about how this would change our logic. Okay, so if x is less than 2, great, we'll go into here, and we have a condition for if y is greater than 8 or it's not. Okay, if it's greater than 8, it'd be hello. If it's not greater than 8, then it'd be goodbye. But if x isn't less than 2, then I don't have an else statement connected to this if statement, and so message would remain as wave because I wouldn't reassign anything else if x was not less than 2. Okay, so depending on what we wanted, that would change it significantly. Let's go to our next, where'd that go? Let's go to our next example. Put that stuff back. Okay, that's right. Our next example right here, I think will help a little bit more because that was just like an abstract wave, hello, goodbye, doesn't make sense because we're like throwing in random numbers. This one makes a little bit more sense. So let's look at our defining table here. It says a person's age and the number of games that person has attended. Okay, and this program has to do with getting the ticket price for a specific person. So, you know, like when you go out to eat or something like that, if you're a child, you can eat for less. Okay, so this program will look at a person's age and the number of games they've attended. So I just got like this awesome thing for Cafe Rio, where I like get points when I eat there. I love Cafe Rio. And they don't have them in Texas, which is horrible. So anyways, so yeah, so similar to that, the more games you attend, supposedly, the cheaper it would be to buy another ticket. Okay. So the processing determine the price to charge that person for a ticket to a game, and the output, the price of the ticket. All right. So let's look at this logic that we have in here. Lots of nested if statements. Let's just make sure that's all of it. Okay, that's all of it. Okay, so for our input, we get the age. We're parsing it as we get it. We get the age of the individual and the number of games that they've attended. Both numbers, both ready to do math with and comparisons and stuff like that. And then we declare price. All right. Now here's what we're saying. If age is less than 18, okay, so if you're not an adult, all right, then you have this set of prices. Okay. If you've attended less than 6 games, $8. If you've attended less than 11, it'll be $6, else it'll be $5. Okay, so here's how this works. I could easily put here games attended is greater than 5, and games attended is less than 11. All right, because this one's saying if it's less than 6. So right here, would I have to put this right here to say, all right, if it's greater than 5 and less than 11? What do you guys think?
No, I don't think you have to.
Why not?
It's already shown if it's less than 6.
Exactly. Yeah. If it's less than 6, it'll go into here and it'll skip the rest of this stuff. So I don't have to explicitly say, okay, if it's not less than 6 and it's less than 11, you know, like we already know it's not less than 6 if we've gotten to this point. Okay. So yeah, very good, Emily. So here I check. All right. If it's a minor who's been less than 6 games, it's $8 a ticket. If they've been from 6 games to 10 games, it'll be $6 a ticket. And if they've been to more than 10 games, $5 a ticket. Okay. Now, let's look at if it's less than 55, if the age is less than 55. So this is getting everyone from ages 18 to 54. Okay. If they've attended less than 11 games, it's $10. Otherwise, if they've done 11 and up, so anything more than 10, it'll be $8. Okay. And then we have this else statement to handle everything else. Now remember, this if-else block in this first column right here is all about age. Okay, I'm saying if age is less than 18, if it's less than 55, or if it's greater than 54 is basically what we're saying right here, right? And so this could be, you know, like the senior price. We could call it that, okay? And if they've been to more than 10 games, it'd be $6, otherwise it'd be $8 for a ticket for the seniors, okay? And so Emily, to your question, when we were looking at the last one, like, show me an example of, you know, like when you could mix these things up. Well, if I put, let's say I put like this if statement like up here, like that could really mess things up, because all of a sudden this if statement corresponds to this if else, or else if, and this else, you know? So I could easily have a person who's been to less than 6 games, and it would just like throw off my logic completely if I didn't have these nested correctly. But as it was, it's easy to see that my first if else block is all about age, and then each side of each age I have a specific price depending on how many games they've been to. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice this. Let's practice this. Paste it in here. Okay, let's open this guy up so we can see our code. Age, let's say we're 15 years old and we've been to 9 games. All right, I'm going to throw a breakpoint right in here so we can stop our code. We get age, 15, good. Games attended is 9, good. All right, now what will the price be? age is 15, and they've been to 9 games. What will the price be?
$6.
Yeah, nice job. So let's look at this. Age is 15, so we know immediately we're going to go into this first if block of code right here, and the rest of this will never get touched because the first if block was true. Okay, so I'll hit F10, and now we're inside this block of code, and they've been to 9 games. Okay, so games attended is less than 6. That's false because it's 9. Hit F10. Now it'll check to see if it's less than 11, which is true. So the price is 6, and then I'll hit F10 again. Boom, jumps all the way to the bottom. Skipped that else statement, skipped this else if, skipped this else, because those conditions were already handled. And then it'll just tell us the price on the page. Okay, let's try one more. And let's make that like 3 games. Okay, so 25 years old, and they've been to 3 games. What would the price be?
$10.
$10. Let's check it out. So we have age of 25 is less than 18. That's false. So it skipped over that, regardless of how many games they've attended. Right now, we're only checking to see what their age is. Is age less than 55? Yes. And is games attended less than 11? Yes. So price should be $10, and that gets displayed on the page. Okay. So notice how I'm using the debugger here, okay? Again, I put a breakpoint on just the first line of this function, and I'm just hitting F10, and I'm just hovering over stuff to see what those values are as we're going, okay? Any questions about this? About the nested if statements, about the debugger, about anything?
I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that this one would be set up in this situation because mostly there's people younger than 18 that go there? Is that why it's set up like that?
You mean like checking to see if it's less than 18 first?
Yeah, and then it also has more. It has an else if and an else in that one as well. It doesn't have that in the other ones.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's a good thought.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. And so you guys noticed, and I told you guys this would happen, but in week 5 with your code submissions to the peer review discussion board, there was a lot of variance. And it'll be the same thing with this. I could organize this the opposite way. I could check to see if somebody was greater than 54 or if they were less than 55 and have else be for the 18 or less. You know, like I could have this completely reversed. I could check for games attended first. There's a lot of different ways that we could write this out and get the same outcome. So just be aware of that as you're working through your assignments this week. All right. Let's see. We already covered that. So a couple of common mistakes. Okay. It's really easy to forget brackets. But you can't forget parentheses. Okay, so right here, if I tried to put this and I had my developer tools open, I would see a bright red arrow show up saying unexpected, character of X. It would expect, after saying if, it would expect to see parentheses. Okay, and we need parentheses around that to show what our condition is going to be. Using assignment instead of comparison. This one's huge. You guys pay attention, please. This is a big one. If age equals 18 versus if age is equal to 18. So a single equals is an assignment operator that we have used all semester. Okay. When we say var x equals something, we use a single equal sign, and that is an assignment operator. If I use a double equal, I'm saying that is a comparison operator. Okay, and so this will say if age is equal to 18, it will compare it. This one will assign age the value of 18 inside this if statement. Okay, so that would mean that every single time we hit this if statement, it would be true because age will always equal 18 because we're assigning age the value of 18 right there. Okay, so be really careful. You never want to put an assignment operator, a single equals, inside of an if statement. You always want to use the comparison operator, the double equals. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. All right, placing a semicolon at the end of an if-else statement, right here. That will also cause an error because it will have no idea what these brackets are doing. That would end your statement, and yeah. So don't throw in random semicolons, okay? Forgetting brackets, we want our brackets there to help us stay organized. Putting conditions on else statements, okay? If we look back at our code, where'd that go? Right here, we never have a condition on the else statement, okay? It would be incorrect if I tried to throw a condition in here, and it would completely destroy the purpose of the else statement. The else statement is like our default. If none of the other conditions were met, here's what we're gonna do. That's what the else statement is for. So if statements have a condition, else if statements have a condition, else statements are for anything else. And using unnecessary comparisons when else can do the job. Okay, so right here, here's an example. I could say if games attended is less than 11, else if games attended is greater than 10. Okay, this would do the exact same thing, but and it wouldn't throw any errors either, but none of this is needed. Okay, this will handle it. So those are some really common mistakes. I think the comparison operator versus the assignment operator, the single equal versus the double equal is the biggest error that I see, or the most common error that I see, I guess I should say. But yeah, so any questions about any one of these?
I have a question as to why with if else statements you don't end the whole thing with a semicolon.
So that's a good question. If we wanted to end the entire thing with a semicolon, we would put it like right here. Okay, this wouldn't break our code. This is like ending a statement. Okay, but this entire thing is like one massive conjoined statement. You know, and they are all, it's all related. You know, and that's why if this is true, JavaScript knows to just skip all this. You know, or if neither one of these are true, then it'll go into the else statement. But this statement of code, this massive statement of code comprised of many smaller statements, is all combined. And so if I stick a semicolon like anywhere inside of here, whether it be like right here or after this else if, it would like end that statement, and then my program would have no idea what this else statement is doing here. Be like, hey, we don't have an if statement to go off of here, you know, and it wouldn't know what that else statement is doing there. You can see that inside, semicolons are needed. I could have, you know, like 50 lines of code here, do a bunch of stuff if I wanted to, and each single statement would need its own semicolon to end that statement. But this if else block is one like massive chunk of code that is all related. And so anytime you're doing if else statements, just don't have any semicolons on any line with if or any line with else if or else. Okay. Does that answer your question?
It does. I understood that. I was just wondering why, because it is a whole statement, you wouldn't end the whole statement with a semicolon like you were for any other statement. What makes it so unique that you're not adding a statement? I mean, you're not ending the statement.
That's a good question, because I mean, like I said, I could put this there and it wouldn't throw any errors and my code would execute the same. But for whatever reason, we just don't. You know, similar to like every time we end a function, if I look up here, I have this function called ticket price. We haven't been ending our functions with semicolons either. And so again, it wouldn't be incorrect. I could put a semicolon here and it would work fine. But usually when we have closing curly braces, that's usually enough for developers to just be like, okay, that's like ending, you know, that chunk of code, and then we just leave it at that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope that answered it. All right. Any other questions, you guys?
Concerning about the homework or assignments,
Yeah, you can ask me a question about the homework.
would you suggest to use switch or if statements and nested if statements?
You should use whatever you're most comfortable with.
All right.
If you saw an example in if you saw, because either will work. If you saw an example from the book with the switch statement and that makes more sense to you, then awesome, use the switch statement. If this happens to make more sense to you, use if statements. You know, both are fine.
Gotcha.
Good question, Michael. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, you guys, thank you for joining. Thanks for all your great questions. If you have any questions while you're working on your assignments or anything, or something's not clicking, just shoot me an email, and I'll see if I can help you out. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.